Welcome to Life Beyond the Founder, a podcast produced by Untold. Talking about this journey that we've been on to prepare the next generation of leadership for our ministry. My name is Justin Miller. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Untold and have been serving in that capacity for the past 17 years. I'm joined by Molly Heacock. We're going to be doing this together. Molly has been with Untold for the past 13 years. She currently serves as our managing director, but she's also our CEO-elect. And over the past 20 years as an organization, we've thought a lot about this idea of succession. We have asked ourselves, what is it that makes organizations successful in this? We do, over the next few episodes, want to share with you what we've learned through this journey of preparing to have this huge leadership transition, to hand off the baton to Molly as she steps into this role, and the things that have gone well, the things that haven't, and what we've learned along the way. And we hope that this will be a valuable resource to you in whatever leadership transitions you're walking through in your own life. So Molly, I want to change up a little bit about how we do introductions on this podcast because, and we've done this before, but we've been working together for 13 years now, and outside of our families, we probably know each other better than most people in our lives. So I would like to ask you if you would do a proper introduction of me to let our audience know a little bit more about my story, and then I will do the same for you.
Yes, I love this. We do this with new staff members sometimes, and it's always so fun because, the people who work with you tend to know you better than you know yourself at a certain point. So for those who do not know, Justin Miller, I'll start with like the resume introduction and then what I've learned in working alongside you at Untold for over a decade. But I mean, your resume, you're an impressive man. You are obviously the founder and CEO of Untold. And Justin is one of those founders who, when you think of a typical founder, you don't really fit the mold for that in what I think is like a really fun and cool way. Typical founders are, ready, shoot, aim. That is not Justin Miller. Their typical founders are extroverted. They're serial entrepreneurs. They are 1,000 miles ahead of the rest of the team. Again, not Justin. Justin, in addition to having a business school degree, he went to Vanderbilt for undergrad and had 2 majors, and of course, I'm sure had like a 4.0. I actually don't know your school grades. I'm sure you got all A's, 4.5 if possible. Justin was the most likely to succeed in high school. We do share that in common. That's probably the one thing that we actually share in our intros. But in addition to just Justin's impressive resume, if you don't know him, he is a humble, genuinely servant leader-oriented person he's an introvert. He's a guardian. He's one of the most detail-oriented people I've ever met. He catches my mistakes very frequently. And if we were to look at Justin's identity, the way that he typically introduces himself, his family's always first, his faith is always first. Untold, of course, is a baby of Justin's, but not before anything that is eternally important. So Justin's also one of the smartest people I've ever met. He has this really uncanny way of taking something that I'll say that takes me 20 minutes to say, 20 pages to write, and can parse it down into like the one perfect phrase that's sticky, that all has alliteration. He's a marketer in a sense. Like, you can really make huge ideas digestible for the people you lead and for the people you draw into the work. Justin Miller is a man of many talents, and co-founder and CEO is honestly the least impressive thing about you as a person.
That's all very, very kind. Maybe another life I could have been a Baptist pastor. I could have alliterated a lot of things.
Absolutely. 3-point sermons.
I do love an alliteration. Well, that was very, very generous introduction. I want to introduce Molly to you, and I want to go back even further, because I think you can't understand Molly today unless you understand Molly that grew up not too far from where we're filming this in a funeral home.
That's right.
And so we blame a lot of who Molly is today on her
it's a positive attribution.
Upbringing. Molly was always one of the brightest, smartest people in her world, but she also had a passion for theater. You were an enthusiast around theater.
Still am.
Which is one of the reasons why you're such an effective communicator. I would say that Molly would probably tell you if in another life, if she wasn't doing this work, if she could be a local community actor in a local theater, that would be her like alter ego.
That's the real dream job.
That's the real dream. So Molly, there's many layers to Molly. She went to Georgia Tech. Molly is, you'll learn very quickly that her intellect and her mind is unmatched in the way she thinks and solves problems, but it's grounded in a deeply compassionate heart that has been there from the very, very beginning. When I met Molly, she was working in Atlanta, serving people experiencing chronic homelessness, and she had really given her life to that. And it was through a connection, actually a high school connection to me.
Yeah.
The actually other person who was most likely to succeed at my high school.
The three most likely to succeed.
Yes, we made quite a trifecta, and she recommended Molly for a job at Untold. And I'm not sure what it was that really made Molly consider this work that was halfway around the world. It was obviously had some overlap with homelessness, but it was a completely we were still a very young, immature organization, and Molly kind of bet it all on the work of Untold. And here we are looking back 13 years later, and I just feel just so much favor and blessing from God that we found each other when we did, because I cannot imagine how the story of Untold would have unfolded had it not been for you as a part of that story. So 13 years at Untold, you've held a lot of different roles. You've been the operations director, you've been the COO, you've been the managing director, and soon to be CEO. So it is amazing to watch your journey. Molly, I would not want to forget that she is married to Andrew. She has two amazing, beautiful kids, and her roles as a wife and a mother and a follower of God those are things that are primary to her identity, but she also loves and has given her life and her vocation to the work of Untold. And so here we are today, about to make this handoff in leadership, and there's nobody that I could imagine being a better steward of this next season of this ministry than you.
Oh, God. Well, it's an honor. And we're going to talk a lot in this podcast about identity. This is like a through line. The fun part of introducing each other is that we get to kind of highlight all of the different angles and aspects of each other's personalities and identities. But especially in a CEO transition and a leadership handoff like this, we've both had the opportunity, I'll call it an opportunity, to wrestle through identity and how that plays into vocation and how it's different and how it's formed. But before we get into that kind of philosophical, theological, heady stuff, which I love so much, I really want to get down to the practicals of why a succession, why now, how did you even start thinking about it? So I want to dig in and kind of interview you for the next couple minutes about this whole process. So tell me about kind of the first time you started Untold 18 years ago. You were still in college, you were still in undergrad. Tell me about like the first time you thought about succession. What stage in the ministry and the founding was that? What was your philosophy, and how has that evolved over time and gotten us to where we are today?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think for our listeners, it would be helpful to go and just say again that one of the reasons why we're doing this is because over 18 years, I've not had a lot of roadmaps for succession. I haven't seen a lot of examples of it done well, sadly. And we would not do it exactly the same way again, but I would say on the whole, like we've done a lot of things well. And so I'm grateful that this could live as a resource for other organizations who are walking through this, because sadly, the missions that we give ourselves to, our lives to, are so important to let them fall apart or even just kind of flounder in a transition that causes them the mission to suffer. And so going back to where I started thinking about this, believe it or not, I started thinking about it really, really early on. And I wish I could say it was because I had this like just highly, evolved view of leadership, and I knew that I needed to submit myself to the mission and the cause. But reality was, I thought about succession at first as more of an escape hatch.
Yeah.
When I said yes to this assignment, I didn't really know what I was signing up for. And for the first couple of years, I was kind of working on this as a volunteer, nights and weekends. Eventually, it became my full-time job. But even then, I didn't know exactly what I had kind of bitten off. And it was 2008, the world economy had just crashed, and I had this 4-year degree from this amazing institution, and I was working in my apartment trying to stand up this small nonprofit that I really didn't have any visibility to the work that was happening on the ground in East Africa. And so at some point there were days of frustrations, discouragement, and I was like, what have I gotten into? And so, but I was invested in the mission. I believed in it, but I didn't know if this was my calling. Is this what I'm supposed to be working on? And so my first thought was, well, I can develop somebody that can take over this work, and I can still support it. I can be on the board, but somebody else can run the day-to-day. And so that's what made me start thinking about, is there some way to pass the leadership off, which I was very naive to even think that. Not sure who would have raised their hand at that point. Who, you want to make $30,000 a year, and
been around for 2 months.
So that was my first philosophy. Was very much driven about my own self-preservation and self desires. Then it shifted a little bit, and I don't remember exactly the event I was at, but I was listening to somebody talk about leadership, and they were talking about how the measure of somebody's leadership, a good litmus test for the measure of someone's leadership, is how well the organization does after they leave the leadership role. Yeah. And I thought, that sounds really, really good. I think I need to be thinking about my life beyond Untold. For our listeners, we're going to call it Untold the whole time, but for this part of the story, it was actually called Care for AIDS. So we'll get to the rebranding later in the story. Yeah. But I realized this idea that I needed to create a legacy for myself beyond Untold, where a measure of my success would be how well my successor did in the role. I don't think that's a bad litmus test, but I do think that it still centers the conversation on the wrong thing. Oh yeah. I think it's actually it's still ego driven. And we're going to talk about this a lot, but it's at the end of the day, it's what are people going to think about me? Right. What's my legacy? Are they going to evaluate me as a good leader or a bad leader based on what happens in this handoff? And so that was a phase of starting to evolve in my thinking on it. But then came the point, and when exactly this happened, I couldn't tell you, but there was a clear shift where I realized that the mission is everything. The mission is the mission. My job, the mission is the mission, and my job is to elevate the mission to such a place that no person should ever be equal to the mission. That doesn't mean people should be exploited in pursuit of the mission. Right. But the mission is the most important thing, and I need to ensure that the work of Untold and the ministry is prepared to carry on beyond me. And that may come a point in time where I need to step back and put somebody else in that leadership role for the benefit of the organization and for the benefit of the mission. And it has been a joy to see that come to fruition, a reality that a lot of founders don't get the chance to see, because oftentimes it doesn't get to happen on their own terms. And I've been able to see that play out. That's true. And we'll kind of talk later in this episode about how do organizations most typically go off course, or how does this end up badly? I feel like, especially in the early days of us talking publicly about a leadership handoff, the initial reaction is so typically, what went wrong? Right. Who made a huge mistake? Is it, is the organization in trouble? Is there a health issue? Is Justin burnt out? The narrative, I think, in our culture right now, in American culture, particularly in Christian nonprofits, is that when a leadership handoff happens, everybody reads between the lines because there was a crisis. And so we'll talk about kind of how that narrative
came to be and some of the things that we've seen and that we've tried to really actively mitigate against, and that you in particular have tried to mitigate against. But I want to get into some of the practicals. Again, when we talk about this publicly, you're always so nice and you're always so kind about my leadership and how easy it was to make the decision. But the reality for most people, and for you, like that's the fun marketing story. But the reality is that we've been working together for 13 years. I started working with you and had no concept of what it meant to be even a good individual contributor in the international development space. I learned so much on the job. And so I want to kind of track if there are points in time or stories or anecdotes that you're willing to share for other founders who might be listening, or even for folks who are thinking like, I want to be in leadership one day. When were the points where you intentionally like made a bet on me, made a bet on developing my leadership, knowing that there, of course, over 13 years, I had exit ramps and I could have taken any number of them and it would have been reasonable and easy for you to have invested a ton of work in developing me as the future leader. And then I leverage that to go do something else. And there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
Like we're never going to have someone sign in blood. That's like, you have to be on this team as the next leader for the next 15 years. I would do it. But when you think about the typical founder, the typical CEO who's investing really intentionally in people on top of doing the job of a CEO, what were the bets that you made? What were the trade-offs that you made? What were the points in time when you started to gain confidence that I could be the one? And then, how did we get to this point where we're both confident, we've both signed the job description? How did we get here?
Yeah. Well, you're not going to like my answer because it's going to continue to feed into this narrative that you don't think is true. But the reality is, like, there obviously there were inflection points, there were bets that I made, but I've made bets on a lot of people over the years, and it's not just for who's going to sit in this chair when I'm gone, but I've made a lot of bets, and continuously making a bet on you has been the easiest bet that I've ever made. I mean, it's not like a 50-50 bet. It is like there is, and even when I hired you, it wasn't day one. I was like, oh, this is the person, even though I knew that you were different when I sat down for that first and I think only interview that we did in the whole process, one conversation. But I remember thinking, and I saw this on display time and time again, that really, and this is true for most roles in our organization, like at the end of the day, if you don't have the people leadership skills, we'll teach you that as long as you have that mindset that you want to grow. If you don't have the subject matter expertise to know about public health in Africa, well, join the club. I don't have that. I don't have that either. And when I hired you, you didn't have people leadership experience. You didn't have all the public health background that you do today, and that was fine. Like that wasn't what I was looking for in a future leader. Because as we know, it's like the leader's job is to think about where we're going and try to figure out how to, remove obstacles to where we're trying to get to, and empower a team of people to go and help to accomplish that. And ultimately, it's like, what are the core things that need to be present in a person for them to be eligible for that kind of leadership role? Like, unshakable, unquestionable moral integrity and character. Somebody who truly puts the needs of others before themselves and would be willing to sacrifice greatly for somebody else. Somebody who is just a voracious learner and so curious and wants to grow, which we haven't even talked about. Like Molly would be a professional student, if not an actress. Probably would just be a professional student. Somebody who takes responsibility, shares praise for the team and owns mistakes themselves. Like the list goes on and on. Somebody who walks with humility and grace and patience, and those are things that you can over some amount of time you can develop those in people, but in an organizational context that's really, really hard. And I've not worked with anybody over the past 20 years that has all of that in such great measure as you do. And so for me, there have been moments where your amazing skills and expertise were on display, both as somebody who was working cross-culturally. Obviously, the commitment to the cause was unmatched. You moved your family to Africa for a year, and we can talk about how challenging that was, but you endured a lot for the sake of the mission. You developed, every project that you touched was done with just the absolute highest standard of excellence. And people wanted to follow you. At the end of the day, like, that's kind of ultimately what leadership is. Like, will people follow you? And every time we grew our team, you were the leader that people wanted to follow. And so I knew long before we started talking about it publicly, long before I went to the board, long before, we made this official, that like, this is the person I want to invest in. And you joked that, like, was I the only one on the team?
Yeah, I literally was.
You were. And that is why, though, I will encourage other leaders who have teams. Like, even today, our team is still 12 people. So it's hard to build a really deep bench with 12 people.
Yeah, so true.
And so I'm just grateful. Maybe it was a happy accident, but that one of the first hires that I made was somebody of your caliber. And I haven't seen anybody quite at that level over the past 20 years. So as you're thinking about building your team, even if you're looking to a potential transition 5 years out, 10 years out, like, if you want to have an internal successor, which we'll talk about, is one of the proven methods that increases the likelihood of success. You got to be thinking really carefully about who those hires are that are going to be close to you on your leadership team, because it is really hard when you decide that you might want to make a transition. If you don't have that person on your team, you're either accepting that, hey, this might be another 5 years to go and find the person, develop them, make sure that their values aligned and they fit within our culture, or you just have to accept that maybe in this transition it's an external candidate, and that's okay too. Organizations do have to do that.
They do it all the time.
For us, particularly working in the context where we do cross-culturally with Africa, having an unknown quantity step into the senior leader role, I think would have been really, really challenging as it relates to our African counterparts.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to point out this like countercultural, maybe counterintuitive approach to investing in potential leaders. Because like I mentioned in your intro, you're not a typical CEO. You're not a typical founder. There's like kind of this charisma. You have charisma. I'm not saying you're not charismatic
I think we were
at all.
That's later.
That's the next episode. But no, what I mean is to say, like, a typical CEO is not the like highly detail oriented. Like, you're an introvert who's learned to be an extrovert. You are so highly focused. Like, you're not the typical founder who's starting new projects all the time and the team is catching up and kind of containing you. You are your own containment most of the time. And so I think you already being a relatively unique founder in that sense helped you look for qualities in a successor that are kind of counterintuitive, countercultural. I remember early on in our time working together, I was in my 20s and I had this opportunity for another job. And it was like, at the time, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it, that someone like called me up to offer me this job. And at the time it felt like a huge amount of money, and like an idiot, probably looking back, I came to you, not to leverage it, but to be like, what do you think I should do? Right. And you're like, I mean, don't take it. But I remember actually the wisdom that you gave me at that point in time, because I wanted to be open and honest that like, hey, like this, I got this call, I feel committed to this work, but like, I want your input as a leader who I respect. And I remember at the time you talking about, I needed to kind of do some soul searching to determine, am I a farmer or am I a rancher? And I love these little like leadership archetypes. This one has always stuck with me because it's, we talked about farmers are people who are like primarily wanting to stay where they are, be loyal, grow their crops, harvest, plant, they're patient. It's not like a super charismatic, out there, go-getter, networking type of person. And ranchers are the people who are like, they're out in the open field, they're catching the cattle, they're wrangling, they're moving, they're like always traveling to the next thing. Neither are good or bad, right? It's just like what your natural tendency is. And I remember being like, oh, I'm a farmer. I didn't even have to think about it. Like if I am nothing if not loyal.
Oh, yeah,
like,
for sure.
like I'm going to stick around. I'm going to be committed. I'm going to be just like, I fall in love with the mission and I'm going to stick with it come hell or high water. And I think that is not something that you initially think about when thinking of the list of qualities for a CEO. I think people typically are thinking of a charismatic person on the stage who can garner support, who's pushing the organization to new heights, who's moving fast and breaking things. Like there's a kind of a Silicon Valley culture value of leaders that I do not fit. And I think the beauty of your atypical founder CEO-ness allows you to look for the type of farmer as an internal successor who you could invest in, and then who could, to your point, not be overly concerned about their personal legacy, but be committed and obsessed with the legacy of the mission and the success of the organization, especially when you're talking about ministries. Like I'm not trying to like double our income and then go to the next thing. Like I'm trying to care for our clients in the absolute best way possible. And I think that's like a unique way of thinking about who to invest in as leaders in your team. So I obviously am appreciative that you invested in the farmer.
You said, I think after that first time though, you stopped telling me all the calls you were getting. I'm grateful for that because I think I would have been really stressed.
I don't even take the calls.
That you were getting these calls. But yeah, no, that was, and that was part of it too, is that, I wanted to, that I will say though, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is that in all the ways that we're different, I think there are some things that I saw in you that were the things that I value, that I wanted to kind of preserve in the organization. And, and we've been a great team. There are certain things where we are too similar, probably.
Sure, absolutely,
we probably needed some external perspective, but that was definitely a big part of wanting somebody that, and I'm sure we'll get into this too, of just talking about how comfortable you were, that you were not seeking this position.
Oh yeah.
And that's something that you've accepted it, thankfully, and you will do the job and you'll do it joyfully and eagerly. But the fact that you were willing to serve in a very unseen, unglamorous, unglorified way for 13 years, without often getting the credit or the praise or attention that you deserve for the work that you do, gives me great comfort that you can handle the type of position and power that comes with being a CEO and handle it well, and it won't be a corrupting influence in your life, which you just can never know when you hire somebody that from the outside. Like how will they wield the power of this role, and will it be something that is stewarded well?
Yeah, well, I mean, along those lines, let's kind of pivot out of the internal specifics into like, how have we seen other organizations, other ministries, other entities do this in a way that we've been like looking at as a cautionary tale? Like, what are the things that you in particular have seen happen that you're like, okay, I want to avoid this, I want to mitigate against this type of transition, and how has that shaped our process over the past few years?
Yeah. So maybe the most obvious one is when it just happens really suddenly.
Yeah.
And obviously, sometimes that can be for any number of reasons. It can be because of a tragic incident. It could be because of a moral failure. But most organizations, I think the number I read was it 17% of organizations have some kind of succession plan.
Wow.
So
that's not enough.
It's not a lot. It's not a lot.
In case you're wondering, listener, that's not good.
Not great. And so when it happens, and leaders leave for a lot of reasons, it doesn't have to be a catastrophic incident, but and I'm not here to throw stones at leaders who do leave quickly, but if your organization is not succession ready and you leave suddenly, another opportunity, you feel called to go do something else, whatever it may be, those organizations, it tends to be a really pretty shocking to the system of those organizations. And it is no telling the impact internally, but it also kind of creates some distrust externally with your stakeholders and funders. We're going to talk a lot about fundraising. That has been a big part of our story, but it is hard to restore confidence in your donors when there's been something that they felt blindsided by, a transition like that. So we watched that happen a number of times. Like, okay, so if we're going to do this, we're going to have to start early, have these conversations way earlier than we feel like we need to have them, right? And that has been true. It's like, aren't you in your 30s?
Right.
It's like, no,
premature.
We have to be ready. There's other examples of organizations where they waited way too long. And the founder became kind of deeply kind of entrenched in the organization, and everything revolved around that person, and all of the donor relationships were tied into that one person. And sometimes it's even the program itself is being, I think if it's, in our case, our program is halfway around the world, but in other cases it's a localized program, and the founder's really hands-on in doing the work of the ministry and whatever it is. So it becomes so like that the founder is so deeply woven into that extracting that person from that becomes really, really hard. And not every organization fails in the aftermath of this, but it does take some time to get them on the right track again. We've seen organizations who planned a transition but went to an external candidate, and that external candidate didn't really understand the real DNA of the culture. And in your case, like you said it very well, like a lot of these folks they think that once an organization gets to a certain point of maturity, they almost need to become more corporate. You hear that said, like, and it's like, okay, things might need to be professionalized. We've tried to do that, but cultures aren't always needing to become more corporate and more sterile and more,
that's
like,
well said.
lacking the spirit of the founder that was lost in that. So there are a number of tales of organizations that we watched experience any number of those, and I knew that I just didn't want that to be the story for Untold. Whether I was thinking about my own personal story, which was part of it, but more importantly, I did not want, whenever I felt it was time for me to be done at Untold, I did not want the organization to be left picking up the pieces of a really bad transition. And as a result, the mission suffers, the clients suffer, and ultimately I just knew that I could not, as a leader, live with that future if that was to come to pass.
In the next couple of episodes, as we talk about identity, we're going to talk a lot more about what you just mentioned about the founder staying too long and letting systems and cultures and ideology evolve around an individual. Like, there's this risk for every founder that you're actually creating an organization in your own image without knowing it. And so your blind spots become the organization's, become the system's blind spots, and become your staff's blind spots. And you hire people most naturally who are like you. And so I think we'll talk more about that in the next episode. But in general, I think you have had a really particularly unique vision of succession. To your point, you're in your 30s. You're the founder. You would have easily had another 20-year runway to think about this, to grow this organization, to get us to like a, certain income point, certain client metric, like, whatever it was that you could have been driving toward, but you've chosen to forge forward with a transition when we're as healthy as we've been as an organization. There's no signs of danger, like you're not getting yourself out of anything, right? So the way we've articulated it internally is that you have always had a vision, and we're trying right now as best we can to live out the vision of a redemptive succession. So talk about what that means. What is a redemptive succession? What is the vision for that? And then we'll talk more about identity.
We need to probably crystallize what this definition is, because I'm not sure I can
alliteration.
I'm not sure I can say it succinctly, but I think first of all, it is that the mission is the mission, that
Yeah.
the mission is the highest priority, and the organization is elevated above the founder himself or herself. I think redemptive succession is one that it requires a sacrificial posture that requires laying down some of the things that often leaders get to experience in their roles, and laying down some of those trappings and saying, I'm willing to submit as a leader to create opportunities for more people to step into that. And in the process of that, I think it's practicing, this is a phrase I borrowed from Praxis, an organization that we both love, but practice dispensability as a leader.
So good.
And not trying to make it so that, and I'm not saying I did this well, I was actually going to talk about some ways I think I messed up on this, but finding ways to make sure that you are not working to actually intentionally build the organization around you as an act of protecting or preserving the power that is often accrued to a leader when people are looking like, oh, look at the work that you do and how noble it is, how great it is.
Yeah.
The leader then begins to want to try to protect that. And I think redemptive succession involves, from the beginning, practicing a spirit of dispensability, not being
so hard,
not being centered in the organization, understanding how to set an organizational pace that creates equity for those on the team, and all of it in service of thinking of who is it that needs to be being prepared to ultimately lead this into the future, and knowing that at the end of the day, I think it's also Peter Greer who says 70% of organizations have succession plans and 100% of leaders eventually transition.
That's great.
We've got to be thinking about that through the lens of how do we know that the idea of being redemptive is that there's restoration through sacrifice. How do we embrace that sacrificial role as a leader, so that the entire organization and those we serve and the mission can be carried forward into the future beyond that single leader. And I think there's a lot of practices that have to lead up to that point, but it is oftentimes succession is something that is done voluntarily when the organization is at its strongest and healthiest, which is what we've tried to do, so that we don't have to do it when things are not going well.
I love your quote about the practicing the art of dispensability. That's like not easy for anyone, but for those who don't know us and are fans of the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 2, Justin's an Enneagram 3. So I'm like primarily driven by being needed. Justin is primarily driven by being like a success. And so both of our core fears are not being needed or not like being seen as indispensable. Like that's a core identity piece that we're going to explore how to untangle that and how to undo that, and how it actually takes a level of commitment to spiritual formation, becoming the type of person outside of your work who embraces obscurity, who embraces being dispensable, who embraces being replaceable. Like, I want more than anything to be replaceable, even though everything in me, my core fear is being replaceable, right? So like there's this dichotomy in that type of leadership. So we're going to get into all that stuff in the next couple of episodes, but close us out. Episode 1, what are your final words?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I would want people to take away from this episode is we're going to talk about, the processes and the things that we did and how we communicated and how we walked through this whole process. But at the end of the day, for succession to be successful, it all goes back to the heart of the leader. And I'm not saying that there have not been selfish desires that are part of my story. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, is the heart posture of the leader that they want the mission to be successful, and are they willing to submit to that as the ultimate goal? And this is also something that I was taught by Peter Greer. So that was a big idea that he said, hey, worry about the procedures and the processes later, but like the heart of the matter is is whether or not the heart of the organization and the board and the leader are willing to recognize that succession is a necessary and helpful part of. And I think Peter tells the story that he has his resignation letter drafted and signed in his desk at his office. I haven't gone that far yet. He does that because he said, I just always want to remember myself that somebody else is going to sit in this chair one day, and I need to be thinking about and preparing for that. And his heart, like mine, is for the mission. And so I would close by saying, if you're in the role of a founder or a leader who's, I would ask you just to inspect, like, where are you in this? Are you really holding on to this because it's a big part of your identity, and because of that, you're not really willing to let go? And is that holding the organization back?
Yeah.
Or are you more open-handed and recognize that you have been asked to steward this mission for a while? You're not an owner, you're a steward.
Yeah.
And are you able to hold that open-handedly so that when the time comes and you're asked to lay that down, are you able to do that?
Yeah.
And over the next few episodes, we're going to talk about, what does it mean? Like, how does our identity tie into this? And it definitely plays out in every aspect of how we lead, how we see the work, how we see our clients. There's so much rooted in that, and we're going to unpack that more in the conversation going forward. But thanks, Molly.
Thanks, Justin. Can't wait.